In the mountains of Afghanistan, where death comes without warning and heroes are born in seconds, a single radio transmission would shake the foundation of what the world's most elite warriors thought they knew about warfare. When Navy SEAL Team 6 found themselves trapped in a hellish crossfire with nowhere to run and ammunition running low, their desperate cry for help would be answered by someone who shouldn't have been there, using skills that defied everything they'd been taught about combat. What happened next would force the Pentagon to rewrite their understanding of what one person could accomplish when everything seemed lost. This is the true story of how a single sniper changed the course of a battle that was supposed to be impossible to win, and why the most dangerous warriors in the world would never look at combat the same way again. The mission was classified. The location was hostile territory. The outcome was supposed to be routine. None of that would matter when the shooting started. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain of the Hindu Kush Mountains as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his grip on his rifle and scanned the valley below through his scope. The air was thin at this altitude, making every breath deliberate and precious. Morrison had been leading SEAL Team 6 operations for 8 years, and his instincts had kept his men alive through dozens of missions that would have broken lesser units. Today felt different though. Something in the wind carried a sense of unease that Morrison couldn't shake, despite the routine nature of their assignment. Intelligence had identified a high-value target holed up in a compound 3 kilometers northeast of their current position. The target was supposedly lightly defended, with minimal security and no heavy weapons. It should have been a textbook operation: get in, neutralize the threat, gather intelligence, and extract before anyone knew they were there. Morrison's team consisted of 6 of the most highly trained operatives in the U.S. military. Each man had survived training that broke 90% of candidates, and each had proven himself in combat situations where failure meant death. Petty Officer First Class Danny Torres was their communications specialist, a compact man from Texas who could establish contact with anyone, anywhere, under any conditions. Torres had once maintained radio contact with command while bleeding from shrapnel wounds in his shoulder during a firefight in Syria. Next to Torres crouched Petty Officer Marcus Williams, their explosives expert. Williams had grown up in Detroit and learned early that survival meant being smarter and tougher than everyone around him. His hands could craft explosives from common household items or disarm devices that would turn most people into pink mist. Williams had a habit of humming old Motown songs while working with explosives, claiming the rhythm helped him stay calm. Behind them, Petty Officer Ryan Chen served as their medic and secondary sniper. Chen's parents had immigrated from Taiwan when he was 5 years old, bringing with them a respect for precision and discipline that Chen had channeled into becoming one of the finest combat medics in the SEALs. He could perform emergency surgery in a sandstorm or put a bullet through a target's eye at 800 meters. His medical bag contained enough supplies to keep a wounded man alive for hours, and his rifle could end a threat before it knew it existed. Petty Officer First Class Michael Rodriguez handled reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. Rodriguez spoke 4 languages fluently and could blend into local populations with an ease that made him invaluable for gathering information. He had spent 3 years living undercover in various Middle Eastern countries, building networks of contacts who provided intelligence that saved American lives. Rodriguez could read terrain like a book and spot enemy positions that others would miss entirely. The youngest member of their team was Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Murphy, a sniper whose skills with a long-range rifle bordered on the supernatural. Murphy had grown up hunting in the mountains of Montana, where his grandfather had taught him that patience and precision mattered more than raw firepower. Murphy could remain motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect shot that would end a threat without alerting anyone else to his presence. Morrison studied the compound through his binoculars as his team prepared their equipment. The building was a typical Afghan structure, built from local stone and designed to withstand the harsh mountain weather. 3 stories tall with a flat roof, it offered good defensive positions and multiple escape routes. Intelligence suggested that their target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against American forces, was meeting with several lieutenants to plan future operations. The compound sat in a natural depression surrounded by rocky hills that provided excellent cover for Morrison's team to approach undetected. A single dirt road connected the building to the main valley, and intelligence indicated that the defenders had only basic weapons and minimal training. The operation should take no more than 2 hours from insertion to extraction. Torres checked his radio equipment one final time, ensuring that they maintained clear communication with their command center. The radio crackled softly as he confirmed their position and readiness to proceed. Command acknowledged their status and gave them green light to begin the approach phase of their mission. Williams verified that his explosive charges were properly armed and ready for deployment. His job would be to create breaches in the compound walls that would allow his teammates to enter quickly and overwhelm the defenders before they could organize effective resistance. Williams had calculated the exact amount of explosives needed to create openings without bringing down the entire structure, which they needed intact for intelligence gathering. Chen performed a final check of his medical supplies and ammunition. His dual role meant carrying extra weight, but Chen had conditioned himself to move quickly despite the additional burden. His sniper rifle was zeroed for the altitude and weather conditions, and his medical bag contained fresh plasma bags and surgical instruments sterilized that morning. Rodriguez studied satellite images of the compound and surrounding terrain one last time, memorizing details that might prove crucial during the operation. He had identified 3 potential escape routes for their target and 2 positions where enemy reinforcements might establish firing positions if the operation went badly. Rodriguez also noted the locations of local civilian populations that needed to be protected during any fighting. Murphy adjusted his scope and calculated wind patterns that would affect his shots during the operation. The mountain air created unpredictable currents that could deflect bullets at long range, so Murphy spent several minutes observing dust patterns and vegetation movement to understand how the wind would behave during their attack. His rifle was loaded with match-grade ammunition that he had personally inspected and prepared. Morrison gave the signal to move out, and his team began their careful descent toward the compound. They moved in a tactical formation that provided mutual support while minimizing their visibility to any potential observers. Each man knew his role perfectly, and they advanced with the smooth coordination that came from years of training and combat experience together. The approach took 45 minutes of careful movement through terrain that offered both concealment and numerous hazards. Loose rocks could create noise that would alert defenders, while sudden elevation changes could expose them to observation from the compound. Morrison led the way, choosing a path that kept them hidden while providing good positions for the final assault. As they moved closer to their target, Morrison noticed details that hadn't been visible in the intelligence photos. The compound showed signs of recent fortification, with new stone barriers that could provide cover for defenders. Several windows had been modified with steel plates that left only narrow firing slits, suggesting that the defenders were more prepared than intelligence had indicated. Torres whispered into his radio microphone, reporting their observations to command while maintaining the low profile necessary to avoid detection. Command acknowledged the new information but confirmed that the operation should proceed as planned. Intelligence still indicated that the compound contained only lightly armed defenders who posed minimal threat to Morrison's highly trained team. Williams examined the compound walls through his scope and adjusted his explosive charges accordingly. The new fortifications meant that his original calculations needed modification to ensure effective breaches without creating excessive noise that might alert other enemy forces in the area. Williams made the necessary adjustments while his teammates provided security. The team reached their final assault positions without incident, taking cover behind rocky outcroppings that provided both concealment and good fields of fire toward the compound. Morrison could see movement inside the building through several windows, confirming that their target was indeed present and conducting the meeting that intelligence had predicted. Chen established his sniper position on a ridge that offered clear views of the compound's main entrance and most of its windows. From this position, Chen could provide covering fire for his teammates while also being ready to engage any threats that appeared during the assault. His medical supplies were positioned where he could quickly reach any wounded teammate. Rodriguez completed his reconnaissance of the surrounding area, confirming that no additional enemy forces were positioned to interfere with their operation. The approaches to the compound remained clear, and local civilian populations were far enough away to avoid being caught in any crossfire during the assault. Murphy positioned himself to cover the compound's rear exit, ensuring that their target could not escape during the confusion of the assault. Murphy's position also allowed him to engage any enemy reinforcements that might approach from the main valley during their operation. Morrison checked his watch and confirmed that they were exactly on schedule. In 15 minutes, they would begin their assault on the compound, neutralize their target, gather intelligence materials, and begin their extraction to the landing zone where helicopters would be waiting to return them to base. The operation was proceeding exactly as planned, with no indications of complications or additional threats. Torres established final communication checks with command, confirming that extraction helicopters were airborne and ready to respond when called. The weather remained clear, and no other military operations were scheduled in their area that might interfere with their mission. Command reported that satellite surveillance showed no movement of enemy forces toward their location. The compound appeared quiet except for the normal activity associated with the meeting they had come to disrupt. Morrison could see guards posted at the main entrance and on the roof, but their positions and behavior suggested routine security rather than alertness for an imminent attack. Intelligence had been accurate about the timing and location of the meeting. Williams moved into position to place his explosive charges, staying low and using natural cover to avoid detection by the guards. The charges would be detonated simultaneously to create multiple breaches that would allow Morrison's team to enter the compound from several directions at once, overwhelming the defenders before they could organize effective resistance. Morrison felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before combat operations. Despite his years of experience, every mission carried the possibility of death or serious injury, and Morrison never allowed himself to become overconfident. His responsibility for the lives of his teammates meant that he approached every operation with maximum caution and preparation. The time had come to begin the assault that would either result in mission success or the beginning of a fight that none of them had anticipated. Morrison raised his hand and prepared to give the signal that would launch his team into action against a target that intelligence promised would be routine and straightforward to neutralize. Morrison dropped his hand, and Williams triggered the explosive charges simultaneously. The mountain air shattered with the thunderous roar of detonations as 3 sections of the compound wall disappeared in clouds of dust and flying debris. The carefully calculated charges had worked perfectly, creating man-sized openings that allowed Morrison's team to pour into the compound from multiple directions. The assault began exactly as planned, with Morrison leading Torres and Rodriguez through the main breach while Chan provided overwatch from his elevated position. Murphy maintained his focus on the rear exit to prevent their target from escaping during the confusion of the attack. The initial moments of the assault proceeded with the smooth precision that marked professional military operations. Then, everything went wrong in ways that no amount of training could have prepared them for. The defenders inside the compound responded not with the panic and confusion that Morrison expected from lightly trained militia fighters, but with the disciplined fire control of experienced soldiers. Instead of the handful of guards that intelligence had promised, Morrison found himself facing at least 30 well-armed fighters who had clearly been expecting an attack. Heavy machine gun fire erupted from reinforced positions that hadn't appeared on any satellite images, filling the air with bullets that forced Morrison's team to seek immediate cover behind whatever protection they could find. The sound of automatic weapons was deafening in the enclosed space of the compound courtyard, and Morrison realized that they had walked into a carefully prepared trap. Torres tried to establish communication with command while bullets chipped away at the stone wall protecting him. His radio crackled with static as enemy jamming equipment blocked their communications, cutting off their connection to the outside world. Without radio contact, they couldn't call for backup or coordinate their extraction with the helicopters waiting in the valley. Williams found himself pinned down behind a pile of rubble from his own explosions, unable to move without exposing himself to multiple enemy firing positions. The defenders had positioned themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that made movement across the compound courtyard nearly impossible. Williams counted muzzle flashes and tried to identify weak points in the enemy positions that his teammates might be able to exploit. Chen adjusted his scope and began engaging targets of opportunity from his overwatch position, but the enemy fighters were disciplined enough to limit their exposure and make effective targeting extremely difficult. Shen could see his teammates trapped in the courtyard below but couldn't provide the supporting fire they needed without better visibility of enemy positions. Murphy's position covering the rear exit came under intense fire from enemies who had been concealed in buildings beyond the compound. Murphy realized that the entire area had been prepared as a kill zone designed to trap any attacking force in a crossfire that would make escape nearly impossible. Murphy counted at least 15 enemy fighters in positions that commanded all of the escape routes from the compound. Morrison pressed himself against a stone wall as bullets struck the surface just inches from his head. 20 years of military experience told him that they had been betrayed by their own intelligence, whether through enemy deception or compromised sources. The defenders knew exactly when and where the attack would come, and they had prepared accordingly. The enemy fighters began advancing across the compound courtyard, using coordinated movement techniques that demonstrated professional military training. These were not the amateur militia fighters that intelligence had described, but experienced soldiers who understood small unit tactics and fire control. Morrison watched them move and recognized training that matched or exceeded the capabilities of many American units. Rodriguez tried to identify the enemy commander's position by observing how the defending fighters coordinated their movements. Professional military units required leadership and communication to maintain effective fire control, and Rodriguez hoped to disrupt their coordination by eliminating key personnel. Rodriguez spotted what appeared to be a command position on the compound's second floor but couldn't get a clear shot from his current location. The situation deteriorated further when Morrison realized that the enemy had heavy weapons positioned outside the compound that could bring devastating fire to bear on their positions. The sound of incoming mortar rounds forced his team to seek whatever cover they could find as explosions walked across the courtyard, throwing debris and creating clouds of choking dust. Torres finally managed to break through the enemy jamming long enough to transmit a brief message to command. His transmission was desperate and clear: "We can't hold. We can't hold. Request immediate backup." The radio went dead again as enemy jamming resumed, but Torres hoped that his message had gotten through to someone who could send help. Williams attempted to use his remaining explosive charges to create new escape routes, but enemy fire prevented him from reaching positions where the explosives would be effective. The defenders had positioned themselves to control all of the natural choke points in the compound, making movement extremely hazardous for Morrison's team. Chen continued to engage enemy targets from his overwatch position, but his ammunition was running low and he couldn't resupply without abandoning his position and leaving his teammates without covering fire. Chen made every shot count, but the enemy fighters were numerous enough that his individual contributions weren't significantly affecting the overall tactical situation. Murphy found himself under increasing pressure as more enemy fighters moved to surround the compound and cut off all possible escape routes. Murphy's position allowed him to observe enemy movements, but he was too far away to effectively communicate what he was seeing to his teammates trapped inside the compound. Morrison assessed their tactical situation and realized that they were facing a coordinated enemy force that significantly outnumbered his team and held superior positions. The enemy had prepared the battlefield to their advantage and had intelligence about Morrison's team that allowed them to anticipate and counter their tactics effectively. The enemy fighters began calling out to each other in multiple languages, demonstrating a level of international coordination that suggested foreign military advisors or trainers. Morrison recognized some of the tactical techniques being employed as methods used by various foreign military forces, indicating that his team was facing opponents with professional military education and experience. Williams managed to detonate one of his remaining charges near what appeared to be an enemy command position, but the explosion only temporarily disrupted enemy coordination without eliminating enough fighters to significantly improve their situation. The defenders quickly reorganized and resumed their coordinated assault on Morrison's trap team. Torres succeeded in making brief radio contact with command again, managing to transmit their grid coordinates and a request for immediate air support before the jamming resumed. Torres hoped that command would be able to send fast-moving aircraft to provide the supporting fire that his team desperately needed to break out of their current position. Rodriguez spotted movement that suggested the enemy was preparing to launch a final assault designed to overrun Morrison's positions. The defenders had been content to pin down the Americans while reinforcements arrived, but now they appeared ready to eliminate the trap seals entirely. Chen's ammunition reached critically low levels just as he identified several enemy fighters moving to positions where they could bring direct fire to bear on his teammates. Chen had to choose between conserving his remaining ammunition for critical shots or providing the covering fire that his teammates needed immediately. Murphy observed enemy forces moving to completely surround the compound, cutting off the last possible escape routes that Morrison's team might have used to break out of their current positions. Murphy realized that his teammates were about to be completely encircled by a force that outnumbered them at least 5-1. Morrison made the decision to attempt a fighting withdrawal toward Chen's position, hoping that the elevated ground would provide better defensive positions and allow his team to hold out until help arrived. The movement would be extremely dangerous, requiring his team to cross open ground under heavy enemy fire. The enemy fighters seemed to sense that the Americans were preparing to move, and their fire intensified as Morrison prepared to give the order for his team to begin their desperate attempt to reach more defensible positions. Morrison knew that some of his men might not survive the movement, but staying in their current positions guaranteed that none of them would survive. Torres attempted one more radio transmission, broadcasting on emergency frequencies in hopes that someone would hear their desperate situation and respond with the help they needed. Torres's voice was steady despite their circumstances as he transmitted what might be their final message: "This is SEAL Team 6. We are surrounded and taking heavy casualties. Immediate assistance required or we will be overrun." The radio fell silent again as enemy jamming resumed, and Morrison prepared to give the order that would either save his team or result in their destruction. The next few minutes would determine whether SEAL Team 6 would survive what had become the worst tactical situation any of them had ever experienced. Morrison raised his hand to signal the beginning of their movement toward Chen's position, knowing that they were about to attempt something that had very little chance of success. Their only hope lay in their training, their trust in each other, and the possibility that help might arrive before they were completely overwhelmed by enemy forces that had prepared specifically to destroy them. The enemy fire reached a crescendo as Morrison dropped his hand and his team began their desperate dash across open ground toward positions that offered their only hope of survival. Bullets filled the air around them as they ran, and Morrison wondered if any of them would live to see another sunrise. Morrison's team sprinted across the open courtyard as bullets whistled past their heads and struck the ground around their feet. Torres stumbled when a bullet grazed his shoulder but managed to keep moving with Rodriguez's help. Williams provided covering fire while moving, his rifle spitting controlled bursts at enemy positions to suppress their fire and give his teammates precious seconds to reach better cover. The dash across open ground felt like it lasted forever, though Morrison knew that only seconds passed between leaving their initial positions and reaching the rocky outcropping where Chen had established his overwatch position. Every step carried the possibility of death, and Morrison felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that came during the most intense moments of combat. Chen shifted his position to provide better covering fire for his approaching teammates, carefully selecting targets that posed the greatest immediate threat to their movement. Chen's rifle barked steadily as he eliminated enemy fighters who had clear shots at his teammates, but his ammunition situation remained critical with only a few rounds remaining. Rodriguez reached Chen's position first and immediately began identifying enemy positions for engagement once the rest of the team arrived. Rodriguez counted at least 40 enemy fighters visible from their new position, with more certainly concealed in positions that couldn't be observed from their current vantage point. Rodriguez realized that they faced a force large enough to overrun their position through sheer numbers, regardless of their tactical skills. Williams arrived next, his ammunition load significantly reduced from the covering fire he had provided during their movement. Williams quickly surveyed their new position and identified locations where he could place his remaining explosive charges to create defensive barriers or eliminate groups of advancing enemies. Williams had enough explosives left for perhaps 2 more effective deployments. Torres collapsed behind cover as soon as he reached Chen's position, his shoulder wound bleeding more heavily than he had initially realized. Chen immediately began treating Torres's wound while maintaining his watch for enemy movement, demonstrating the multitasking skills that made him invaluable during combat operations. Torres's radio equipment had been damaged during their movement, eliminating their last hope of re-establishing communication with command. Murphy remained in his original position, cut off from his teammates by enemy forces that now controlled the space between his location and theirs. Murphy could observe the tactical situation but couldn't communicate with his team or provide direct support for their defensive efforts. Murphy's position was becoming increasingly untenable as enemy fighters moved to surround him. Morrison assessed their new position and realized that while it offered better fields of fire and some protection from direct assault, it was still dominated by enemy positions that could bring devastating fire to bear on his team. The enemy had clearly anticipated that any surviving attackers would attempt to reach the higher ground, and they had positioned forces accordingly. The enemy fighters began coordinating a new assault designed to overrun Morrison's reduced team through concentrated fire and movement. Morrison could see enemy leaders directing their forces and recognized professional military tactics being employed against his position. These opponents understood how to coordinate large unit operations and maintain effective command and control under combat conditions. Chen's wound treatment of Torres revealed that the bullet had passed completely through Torres's shoulder without striking bone or major blood vessels. Torres would survive his wound, but he had lost enough blood to significantly reduce his combat effectiveness. Chen bandaged the wound quickly but thoroughly, knowing that Torres would need proper medical attention as soon as possible. Williams identified an enemy position where a concentration of fighters posed the greatest threat to their defensive perimeter. Williams calculated that one of his remaining explosive charges could eliminate that position and significantly reduce the enemy's ability to coordinate effective fire against his team. Williams began planning his approach to the target while his teammates provided covering fire. Rodriguez spotted what appeared to be the enemy command element positioned in a building approximately 300 meters from their location. Rodriguez could see enemy leaders coordinating the assault through radio communications and map consultations, but the distance and intervening cover made engaging the target extremely difficult with the weapons currently available to Morrison's team. The enemy assault began with concentrated mortar fire that forced Morrison's team to seek whatever cover they could find among the rocky outcroppings. The mortars were being directed by observers who could see Morrison's position clearly, and the accuracy of the incoming fire demonstrated professional artillery techniques. Explosions walked across their defensive perimeter as enemy gunners adjusted their aim. Torres managed to jury-rig his damaged radio equipment sufficiently to attempt one more transmission to command. Torres broadcast continuously on emergency frequencies, hoping that someone would hear his desperate calls for immediate assistance. Torres's transmissions included their current grid coordinates and a detailed description of the enemy forces they were facing. Murphy's isolated position came under direct assault from a squad of enemy fighters who had worked their way around the compound to attack him from multiple directions. Murphy engaged the attacking enemies with precise rifle fire, but he was severely outnumbered and couldn't hold his position much longer without support from his teammates. Williams executed his plan to attack the enemy concentration, leaving cover under suppressing fire from his teammates and sprinting toward the target position with his explosive charge. Williams knew that he was exposing himself to tremendous risk, but eliminating that enemy position was critical to his team's survival. Chen continued to engage individual enemy targets while monitoring Torres's condition and maintaining awareness of the overall tactical situation. Chen's ammunition was nearly exhausted, but every round he fired was carefully aimed to eliminate the most dangerous threats to his team's defensive perimeter. Morrison realized that their position was about to be overrun by an enemy force that had successfully concentrated overwhelming firepower against his reduced team. Morrison began planning a final fighting withdrawal that might allow some of his men to escape, even if it meant sacrificing himself to provide covering fire for their movement. The sound of Williams's explosive charge detonating provided temporary relief from enemy fire as the explosion eliminated an entire squad of attacking fighters. Williams's successful attack also created confusion among the remaining enemy forces, temporarily disrupting their coordinated assault and giving Morrison's team a brief respite. Rodriguez used the temporary reduction in enemy fire to attempt engaging the enemy command element with long-range rifle fire. Rodriguez's shots forced the enemy commanders to seek cover, disrupting their ability to coordinate the assault and causing additional confusion among the attacking forces. Murphy fought desperately against the enemies surrounding his position, using every piece of cover and every tactical technique he had learned during years of training and combat experience. Murphy's situation was hopeless, but his resistance was buying precious time for his teammates and preventing enemy forces from being redeployed against Morrison's main position. Torres's radio finally produced a response from an unknown station that acknowledged their distress call and promised that help was coming. Torres couldn't identify the responding station, but any assistance was better than facing certain death with no hope of rescue. Torres continued broadcasting their situation and coordinates while praying that whoever had responded could actually provide effective help. Chen spotted movement that indicated the enemy was preparing another coordinated assault, this one designed to completely overwhelm their defensive position through sheer numbers and firepower. Chen alerted his teammates to prepare for what might be the final enemy attack against their position. Morrison gathered his remaining team members and explained that their situation was hopeless unless immediate help arrived. Morrison outlined a final defensive plan that would sell their lives as dearly as possible while hoping that rescue might arrive before they were completely overrun by enemy forces. Williams returned to their defensive perimeter after successfully destroying the enemy position, but his ammunition was now critically low and he had no more explosive charges available for defensive use. Williams took up a firing position and prepared to engage attacking enemies with his rifle until his ammunition was completely exhausted. The enemy forces began their final assault with overwhelming firepower directed at Morrison's position. Automatic weapons fire, mortar explosions, and the shots of advancing fighters created a deafening cacophony that marked the beginning of what appeared to be the end of SEAL Team 6's mission. Morrison and his remaining teammates opened fire with everything they had, determined to make the enemy pay dearly for their victory. Their rifle fire was accurate and deadly, but they were simply outnumbered by a factor that made victory impossible regardless of their individual skills and determination. Torres continued broadcasting their final position and situation, hoping that someone might at least be able to recover their bodies and notify their families of their fate. Torres's voice remained steady as he described their desperate situation and requested immediate assistance that he knew was unlikely to arrive in time. Chen fired his last rounds at carefully selected targets, making each bullet count as the enemy forces closed in on their position. Chen then transitioned to his medical role, preparing to treat whatever wounds his teammates might sustain during their final fight. Morrison watched enemy fighters advancing toward their position and prepared to sell his life and those of his men as dearly as possible. 20 years of military service had brought him to this moment, and Morrison was determined to uphold the honor of the SEALs even in what appeared to be their final battle. The enemy fire reached overwhelming intensity as dozens of fighters concentrated their weapons on Morrison's small defensive position. The air filled with bullets and explosion fragments as the final assault began in earnest, and Morrison wondered if any of them would survive the next few minutes. The first shot came from somewhere high in the mountains, so far away that Morrison couldn't even hear the rifle's report. An enemy fighter who had been directing mortar fire suddenly dropped his radio and collapsed, blood spreading across his chest from a wound that appeared instantaneously. Morrison stared at the fallen enemy, confusion mixing with desperate hope as he tried to understand what had just happened. A second shot followed within seconds, eliminating another enemy leader who had been coordinating the assault from a covered position nearly 400 meters from Morrison's defensive perimeter. The bullet struck with such precision that surrounding enemy fighters didn't immediately realize their commander was dead until blood began pooling beneath his motionless body. Rodriguez grabbed Morrison's arm and pointed toward distant ridgelines where barely visible muzzle flashes indicated the position of whoever was providing this unexpected assistance. Rodriguez counted at least 6 enemy fighters eliminated in rapid succession, each shot demonstrating marksmanship skills that bordered on the impossible given the range and conditions. The enemy assault faltered as fighters began seeking cover from an unknown sniper whose position they couldn't identify and whose range exceeded anything they had anticipated. Enemy commanders shouted orders in multiple languages, trying to reorganize their forces while under fire from a threat they couldn't see or effectively engage. Torres managed to establish brief radio contact with their mysterious benefactor, hearing a calm female voice that identified herself simply as Guardian. The voice provided precise targeting information for enemy positions that Torres's team couldn't see from their current location, demonstrating surveillance capabilities that suggested advanced equipment and extensive battlefield experience. Chen observed the incoming sniper fire with professional appreciation, noting shot placement and timing that indicated training far beyond normal military standards. Chen counted 12 enemy fighters eliminated in less than 3 minutes, each shot perfectly placed to cause immediate incapacitation while avoiding unnecessary casualties among surrounding enemies who weren't actively threatening Morrison's team. Williams used the temporary reduction in enemy fire to reposition himself for better observation of the battlefield, trying to identify additional enemy positions that their unknown ally could engage. Williams spotted concentrations of enemy fighters who were attempting to organize counterfire against the sniper's position, but their efforts were hampered by their inability to locate the source of the incoming fire. The mysterious sniper's voice crackled through Torres's radio again, providing detailed intelligence about enemy movements that were invisible to Morrison's team from their current position. The voice belonged to someone who clearly had extensive knowledge of military tactics and communications procedures, speaking with the calm professionalism that marked experienced combat veterans. Murphy's desperate fight against the enemies surrounding his position suddenly became manageable as precise sniper fire eliminated the fighters who had been closing in on him from multiple directions. Murphy heard the distinctive crack of bullets passing overhead and saw enemy fighters dropping around him with wounds that could only have come from an extremely skilled marksman. Morrison attempted to establish communication with their unknown ally, but Guardian's responses remained brief and focused on immediate tactical concerns rather than explanations about who she was or how she had arrived in their area of operations. Guardian provided target coordinates and warned about enemy movements with information that could only have come from someone with exceptional surveillance equipment. The enemy forces began withdrawing from their assault positions as they realized they were being engaged by a sniper whose capabilities exceeded their ability to counter effectively. Enemy commanders attempted to organize search teams to locate and eliminate the hidden marksman, but these efforts were consistently defeated by precise fire that eliminated search team leaders before they could coordinate effective action. Rodriguez observed the tactical situation and realized that their mysterious ally was systematically dismantling the enemy's command structure while avoiding unnecessary casualties among rank-and-file fighters. Guardian's target selection demonstrated sophisticated understanding of military organization and battlefield psychology, eliminating key personnel while leaving surviving enemies demoralized and disorganized. Guardian's voice provided Morrison with detailed instructions for moving his team to a more defensible position while she provided covering fire. Guardian's surveillance of the battlefield allowed her to identify safe routes and warn about hidden enemy positions that Morrison's team would have encountered without her guidance. Chen began treating Murphy's minor wounds once Murphy successfully reached their main defensive position under Guardian's covering fire. Chen noted that Guardian's fire had been so precisely placed that Murphy hadn't been struck by a single bullet despite being surrounded by enemy fighters in close combat. Chen realized that their ally possessed marksmanship skills that exceeded anything he had witnessed during his military career. Williams attempted to identify Guardian's position by observing muzzle flashes and calculating probable firing angles based on enemy casualties, but Guardian's position remained invisible even to Williams's trained eye. Williams estimated that Guardian was engaging targets from a range of at least 800 meters, possibly more, while maintaining accuracy that would be difficult to achieve under ideal range conditions. Torres re-established communication with command and reported their situation, including the intervention of an unknown friendly force that had prevented their annihilation. Command responded with confusion, indicating that no other American forces were supposed to be operating in their area and that they had no information about Guardian's identity or authorization. Guardian's voice provided additional tactical information, warning Morrison's team about enemy reinforcements approaching from the main valley. Guardian's intelligence proved accurate when Morrison spotted vehicle-mounted weapons moving toward their position along routes that Guardian had specifically identified as threat corridors. The approaching enemy reinforcements came under immediate fire from Guardian's position, with their lead vehicle disabled by a shot that eliminated the driver while leaving passengers unharmed. Guardian's engagement of the reinforcing vehicles demonstrated knowledge of automotive vulnerabilities and precision that allowed her to neutralize threats without causing unnecessary casualties. Morrison's team used the confusion among enemy forces to improve their defensive positions and consolidate their remaining ammunition and equipment. Guardian's intervention had transformed their hopeless situation into one where survival was possible, though Morrison remained mystified about their allies' identity and capabilities. Rodriguez observed that Guardian's tactics were consistently focused on neutralizing immediate threats while avoiding engagement of enemies who weren't actively participating in attacks against Morrison's team. Guardian's rules of engagement suggested professional military training combined with an ethical framework that prioritized minimizing casualties while achieving tactical objectives. Chen noted that Guardian's medical knowledge was evident in her target selection, with wounds placed to cause immediate incapacitation while maximizing the chances of enemy fighters surviving their injuries. Chen recognized medical training in Guardian's shooting, indicating someone with extensive knowledge of human anatomy and trauma care. Williams counted the enemy casualties that Guardian had inflicted and estimated that she had eliminated or disabled at least 20 enemy fighters while achieving several vehicle kills and disrupting the coordination of a force that had numbered over 60 combatants. Williams realized that Guardian had single-handedly turned the tactical situation in favor of Morrison's significantly outnumbered team. Guardian's voice warned about enemy attempts to flank their position, providing precise locations and movement patterns that allowed Morrison's team to prepare effective countermeasures. Guardian's surveillance capabilities seemed to extend across the entire battlefield, suggesting equipment and positioning that exceeded normal sniper capabilities. Murphy examined some of Guardian's shot placements on enemy casualties and noted bullet wounds that demonstrated ammunition selection and shooting techniques that went beyond standard military training. Murphy recognized precision and care that suggested someone who had dedicated extensive time to perfecting marksmanship skills under the most demanding conditions. Torres received additional communication from Guardian that included detailed information about enemy radio frequencies and communication protocols. Guardian's intelligence indicated that she had been monitoring enemy communications and possessed electronic warfare capabilities that complemented her sniper skills. Morrison realized that Guardian's intervention had not only saved his team's lives but had also transformed their failed mission into an opportunity to gather extensive intelligence about enemy capabilities and organization. Guardian's systematic engagement of enemy forces had created conditions where Morrison's team could observe and document tactics and equipment that would be valuable for future operations. The enemy forces continued their disorganized withdrawal as Guardian maintained pressure on their retreating units, eliminating vehicles and personnel who posed ongoing threats while allowing others to escape once they no longer represented immediate dangers. Guardian's engagement demonstrated tactical discipline and strategic thinking that impressed Morrison's experienced team. Rodriguez attempted to spot Guardian's position one more time, knowing that their mysterious ally would soon disappear just as mysteriously as she had appeared. Rodriguez wanted to at least see the person who had saved their lives, but Guardian remained invisible despite Rodriguez's knowledge of how to identify concealed positions. Guardian's voice provided final instructions for Morrison's team's extraction, including routes and timing that would avoid remaining enemy forces while reaching the landing zone where helicopters would be waiting. Guardian's final message was simple and professional: mission complete. Stay safe. Morrison and his team began their movement toward the extraction point, still mystified about Guardian's identity but profoundly grateful for intervention that had transformed certain death into survival and mission success. The extraction helicopters appeared on schedule, their pilots following Guardian's precise instructions to avoid remaining enemy positions while reaching Morrison's team at the designated landing zone. Morrison watched the aircraft approach and wondered if he would ever learn the identity of the person who had saved his team from certain death through marksmanship skills that exceeded anything in his experience. Rodriguez conducted a final sweep of the battlefield with his binoculars, hoping to catch a glimpse of Guardian before they departed the area. Rodriguez spotted movement on a distant ridgeline that might have been their mysterious ally withdrawing from her firing position, but the range was too great to confirm any details about Guardian's identity or equipment. Torres attempted one final radio contact with Guardian to express their gratitude and request additional information about her identity, but received only silence on all frequencies. Guardian had disappeared as completely as she had appeared, leaving no trace except for the enemy casualties that marked her precision engagement of hostile forces. Chen compiled a mental list of Guardian's demonstrated capabilities while helping to load wounded team members into the extraction helicopters. Chen counted advanced marksmanship, sophisticated surveillance equipment, electronic warfare capabilities, medical knowledge, tactical planning skills, and communication discipline that suggested extensive military training and combat experience. Williams examined some of the enemy equipment that Guardian's intervention had allowed them to capture, including communication devices and weapons that would provide valuable intelligence about enemy capabilities and organization. Williams realized that Guardian's tactical approach had created opportunities for intelligence gathering that wouldn't have existed without her systematic engagement of enemy forces. Murphy studied the terrain around Guardian's probable firing positions and calculated that she had been engaging targets at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters while maintaining accuracy that would be challenging under ideal conditions. Murphy noted that mountain terrain created wind patterns and atmospheric conditions that made such shooting extremely difficult even for highly skilled marksmen. Morrison briefed the helicopter crew about Guardian's intervention while ensuring that his team received proper medical attention for their wounds. Morrison emphasized that their mission's success was entirely due to Guardian's assistance and recommended that Command investigate her identity and capabilities for potential future cooperation. The helicopters lifted off and began their return flight to base, carrying Morrison's team away from a battlefield where they had witnessed marksmanship and tactical skills that challenged their understanding of what individual soldiers could accomplish under combat conditions. Morrison stared out the aircraft window at the mountains where Guardian had demonstrated abilities that bordered on the supernatural. Torres used the helicopter's communication equipment to file a detailed report about Guardian's intervention, including technical specifications of her demonstrated capabilities and recommendations for follow-up investigation. Torres emphasized that Guardian's assistance had prevented the loss of an entire SEAL team while enabling the capture of valuable enemy intelligence. Rodriguez reviewed the intelligence materials that Guardian's intervention had allowed them to gather, noting that their mysterious allies' tactical approach had created opportunities for document and equipment recovery that would provide insights into enemy operations throughout the region. Rodriguez realized that Guardian's mission understanding extended beyond simply providing fire support. Chen treated his teammates' wounds while documenting Guardian's demonstrated medical knowledge through her precise shot placement and target selection. Chen noted that Guardian's engagement of enemy forces showed clear understanding of trauma care and human anatomy, suggesting medical training that complemented her obvious military experience. Williams calculated that Guardian had expended at least 30 rounds of ammunition while achieving casualty rates that exceeded normal sniper effectiveness by significant margins. Williams realized that Guardian's ammunition selection and shooting techniques represented a level of expertise that went far beyond standard military training programs. Murphy reviewed Guardian's target engagement sequence and noted tactical decisions that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of battlefield psychology and enemy morale factors. Murphy recognized that Guardian had systematically eliminated enemy leadership while avoiding actions that might have provoked desperate counterattacks by surviving fighters. Morrison used the flight time to compile his after-action report, struggling with how to describe Guardian's intervention in terms that would be credible to commanders who hadn't witnessed her capabilities firsthand. Morrison knew that his report would trigger extensive investigation into Guardian's identity and authorization for operating in their area. The helicopters reached base without incident, landing at a secure facility where intelligence specialists were waiting to debrief Morrison's team about their mission and Guardian's intervention. Morrison noted that intelligence personnel seemed particularly interested in Guardian's demonstrated capabilities and possible identity. Torres was immediately taken to a communications center where specialists attempted to analyze his recorded conversations with Guardian, hoping to identify voice patterns or technical signatures that might provide clues about her identity and equipment. Torres cooperated fully while emphasizing Guardian's professionalism and tactical competence. Rodriguez underwent extensive debriefing about Guardian's demonstrated surveillance capabilities and battlefield intelligence, providing detailed descriptions of information that Guardian had possessed about enemy positions and movements. Rodriguez emphasized that Guardian's intelligence exceeded what could have been gathered through normal reconnaissance methods. Chen received medical evaluation while describing Guardian's apparent knowledge of trauma care and human anatomy as demonstrated through her precise shot placement. Chen's medical expertise allowed him to provide detailed analysis of Guardian's demonstrated understanding of wound ballistics and injury patterns. Williams was questioned extensively about Guardian's probable equipment and ammunition based on the effectiveness of her fire and the nature of damage inflicted on enemy targets and vehicles. Williams provided technical analysis that suggested Guardian possessed equipment that exceeded standard military issue specifications. Murphy underwent debriefing focused on Guardian's marksmanship capabilities, providing professional assessment of shooting techniques and accuracy standards that Guardian had demonstrated under difficult conditions. Murphy's expertise allowed him to offer insights into Guardian's probable training and experience levels. Morrison participated in command-level briefings where senior officers struggled to understand how an unknown individual had possessed the capability and authorization to intervene in a classified military operation. Morrison defended Guardian's actions while acknowledging the security concerns raised by her unauthorized presence in their operational area. Intelligence specialists began extensive investigation into Guardian's possible identity, checking databases of military personnel, contractors, and foreign allies who might have possessed the capabilities that Morrison's team had witnessed. Initial searches failed to identify anyone matching Guardian's demonstrated skill profile and operational characteristics. Communication specialists analyzed Guardian's radio procedures and technical signatures, hoping to identify equipment manufacturers or operational methods that might provide clues about her background and training. Technical analysis suggested equipment that exceeded normal military specifications and communication techniques that indicated extensive experience. Medical personnel reviewed Chen's descriptions of Guardian's demonstrated knowledge of human anatomy and trauma care, noting that her shooting techniques suggested medical training that would be unusual for combat personnel. Medical analysis indicated someone with extensive knowledge of both military medicine and advanced marksmanship. Tactical analysts studied Guardian's engagement sequence and target selection, attempting to understand her decision-making process and rules of engagement. Tactical analysis suggested someone with advanced military education and extensive combat experience combined with ethical constraints that influenced her target selection. Morrison's team completed their medical treatment and debriefing while remaining available for additional questioning about Guardian's intervention. Each team member provided consistent descriptions of capabilities that challenged normal understanding of individual soldier effectiveness under combat conditions. Command personnel initiated formal investigation into Guardian's identity and authorization, recognizing that her intervention raised significant questions about operational security and coordination between different military units. Command acknowledged that Guardian's assistance had prevented the loss of valuable personnel while enabling mission success. Intelligence analysis continued for days without producing definitive answers about Guardian's identity or organizational affiliation. Guardian had intervened in their operation with capabilities that exceeded normal military standards, saved their lives through extraordinary marksmanship, and disappeared without leaving traces that could be followed through normal investigative methods. Morrison received official commendation for his team's performance under extreme conditions, but he knew that their survival had been entirely dependent on Guardian's intervention. Morrison continued hoping that he would someday learn the identity of the person who had saved his team when their situation had appeared hopeless. The official mission report credited Morrison's team with successful completion of their assigned objectives while noting the intervention of an unknown friendly force whose identity and authorization remained under investigation. Morrison knew that Guardian's true story would probably never be fully understood, but he would never forget the voice that had guided them through their darkest moment. Guardian remained a mystery whose intervention had demonstrated that sometimes help arrives from the most unexpected sources when trained soldiers find themselves facing impossible odds. Morrison's team had witnessed capabilities that challenged their understanding of what individual warriors could accomplish, and they would carry questions about Guardian's identity for the rest of their careers. The mountains of Afghanistan kept Guardian's secrets, just as they had hidden her position during the firefight that transformed certain defeat into survival and mission success. Morrison looked back at those peaks one final time, wondering if Guardian was still out there, watching over other soldiers who might someday need the kind of miracle that she had provided for SEAL Team 6.